People still speak of Michelle Phillips as one of the radiant symbols of the 1960s, yet the stories that once seemed clear about that era still hold a quiet space that only she seems able to touch. Her presence in photographs from those years evokes not only the California beauty she helped define, but also the depth of someone who had passed through early upheavals and carried them into her music. To many critics, Michelle is the kind of artist whose life explains her tone, a voice crystal clear, seemingly light, yet resonant with things once lost. Michelle entered music with a pure, unusually delicate soprano, an unmistakable timbre John Phillips recognized from her very first audition sessions in New York. That voice bore a simplicity, but also an emotional resonance of its own. Not a display of technique, but a clarity shaped by a childhood marked by disruption. Musicians who worked with her all noticed one thing: every line Michelle sang held a trace of real feeling, as though that was the way she kept order within herself. Throughout her career, Michelle's image was often viewed through two layers: the public radiance anyone could see, and the quiet depth known only to those close to her. This did not create two different people. It was simply Michelle's way of preserving her boundaries in a time when fame often swept artists into places they could no longer control. Michelle was born in 1944 in Long Beach, where the sea wind slipped through their small house day and night, as if the world itself wanted to remind people that it was wider than anything a child could imagine. In that small, fragile body, no one knew that the quiet-eyed little girl would one day grow up carrying that vastness like a shadow. The world too large, and the self too breakable to stand firm against the changes that often arrived without warning. In her memory, Michelle's mother, Joyce, often lay on her side on the long couch, her silhouette thin as worn fabric. The delicacy on her face made it seem as though even light could expose the exhaustion that had settled over her for years. Michelle did not understand the cause. She only sensed, with a child's intuition, that something in the house was changing its color. No one said anything clearly, yet the silence grew heavier by the day. Her father's footsteps tried to keep a normal rhythm, but still revealed their weight. And the evenings when he read aloud to her mother stretched endlessly, as if the two were trying to hold on to something already drifting away. Then one night, the air fell still in a way that cannot be described. Michelle and her sister had gone to bed. The living room remained lit by a single lamp. Her father read, the rustling of pages so soft it could dissolve into the dark. And then the silence settled completely. At 5 years old, Michelle sensed an invisible shift. The room seemed to hold its breath, and there was no laughter anymore. When her father called her mother's name in a low voice that sounded as though it came from somewhere farther away than his body, the little girl knew something had closed. Even without witnessing it with her own eyes, that memory stayed with her for life, like a thin shard of glass buried deep in her mind. One touch, and the sharp pain spread instantly. Her mother's passing created the first fracture in her life, one no one truly attempted to mend. Her father, Gardner Burnett Gilliam, once a man accustomed to the open sea and strong winds, now became someone who had to brace himself to keep the family steady. He did not cry in front of his daughters, but in the gaze that always drifted toward some far place, Michelle recognized that he had lost the most important anchor of his life. After the funeral, the three of them left Long Beach for Buffalo, as though distance might free them from rooms still heavy with memory. The city was so cold that Michelle felt as if she were living inside a frame whose colors had not yet been adjusted. Life revolved around a rented room and the simple meals her father tried his best to prepare. That temporary existence planted a peculiar feeling in Michelle, that nowhere felt stable enough to be called home. 9 months later, they returned to Pasadena. California's sunlight was still bright, but Michelle viewed it from an invisible distance. The old house remained, yet it had lost the soul it once held. The living room where her mother used to lie listening to her father read was now only an empty space. In the rare evenings when she stood behind her father, watching his shadow stretch across the wall, Michelle understood instinctively that there were sorrows without names, and that sometimes adults were just as lost as children. 2 days after her 7th birthday, her father took the 2 girls to Mexico City. No explanations, no promises, just an endless journey that Michelle accepted with the quiet of a child, already too familiar with change. Perhaps Gardner was searching for a place far enough that sorrow would not be able to follow their footsteps. When Gardner brought them to Mexico City, they lived in the Roma Sur neighborhood for 6 years. For Michelle, this was a period both foreign and liberating. She learned Spanish faster than English, adjusted to the vibrant rhythm of the city, and for the first time felt she could stand on her own without relying on the past. These years shaped her quiet, observational nature, an element that later seeped into the way Michelle inhabited characters and shaped melodies. In high school, Michelle studied music, played sports, became friends with Sue Lyon, and appeared as a bright, sociable girl. Yet inside her remained a private sky no one could reach. The skipped classes, forged absence notes, her expulsion from Marshall High and transfer to Eagle Rock High did not reflect rebellion. Rather, they were the actions of a young person trying to discover what, in a life constantly shifting shape, she still had the power to control. One night in Mexico left a lasting mark on Michelle. An early milestone etched into her. Yellow light spilled across the narrow street. Cold air streamed through the window, and the girl, not yet 10, stood silently, watching the world recede in quiet. By then, her grief was no longer as sharp as in the early days after her mother's death. It had stretched into a calm space where a small but steady voice began to emerge. In that moment, the core of Michelle began to take shape. Quiet, unshowy, yet strong enough to support her through the long years ahead. As the images of Mexico slowly settled like a layer of quiet silt at the bottom of water, 17-year-old Michelle stood at the threshold of San Francisco. The city greeted her with cold mist drifting over steep hills, half-open windows humming with unfamiliar music, dimly lit bars where freedom was spoken as naturally as breath. Michelle arrived to live with Tamar Hodel, a friend whose mix of mystery and boldness could change the tempo of a room with nothing more than her entrance. She stepped into modeling with a few test photos. Those advertisements spread her face across the city, not through brightness, but through a soft glow that lingered. Her slender figure, a beauty light as mist, yet enough to make people turn their heads. It was not a beauty that flaunted itself, but a gentle, persistent radiance, the very quality that would later become her signature. By day, Michelle stood before the camera. When night fell, she followed Tamar into spaces where music and instinct tangled like two waves. Small bars, the smell of cigarettes, laughter slipping between live sets, unknown musicians singing with the parts of their lives they had not yet finished living. All of it opened a new horizon. For Michelle, music from that point on was no longer mere entertainment, but a way for people to release whatever they had held too tightly inside. In July 1961, at a small performance in San Francisco, Michelle met John Phillips, a musician much older and searching for a new direction after previous projects. Their brief conversation did not last long, but John quickly noticed the blend of intuition and refinement in Michelle's nature. A few months later, they moved to New York, beginning a period of writing and searching for a shared sound. Over time, John recognized something Michelle herself had never seen. Her soprano, clear as water flowing over stone yet with the grain of a seasoned loneliness, was rare in folk rock. Light but not hollow, soft but unyielding. One rehearsal in their New York apartment, when Michelle sang along to a half-finished piece of John's, he stopped immediately. Her soprano was not loud, but its contours shimmered with a purity the folk rock world had not yet heard. John realized this was the missing piece, and their musical chapter began there. In the silence that followed the phrase, Michelle understood. Her voice was not just sound. It was a door, a compass, a key life had quietly shaped, waiting only for the right moment to fall into her hands. In 1965, the Mamas and the Papas formed with 4 members: John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, Cass Elliott, and Denny Doherty. The group's harmonies created a new color for folk rock, an airy sound soft as wind and clear as early sunlight, later known as the California sound. Within that structure, Michelle's soprano was the fragile yet essential line, brightening the harmonies and giving the arrangements a spacious clarity. In the studio, Michelle did not stand there simply to hit notes. She leaned toward the microphone with the intuition of a listener rather than a performer. She sensed the music through small details: where she stood, how she breathed, the thinness of a single vowel. Even one sustained tone could alter the room's atmosphere, not out of force but out of the quiet precision that made others instinctively adjust to her. Michelle sang as if holding something delicate in her hands. Too much pressure would shatter it. Too little, it would float away. She did not enter music with a plan, but with the call of her own voice. It opened a wide and unexpected door, and she stepped through without calculation. Some paths do not require reasons. They simply open for those who recognize they are ready. Music came to Michelle like a door swung open. But this period soon turned it into a storm. Raising her up while pulling her toward shadows no young person is ever prepared to face. The Mamas and the Papas formed in 1965, and almost instantly the 4 of them, John Phillips, Cass Elliott, Denny Doherty, and Michelle, were thrust into the center of a rapidly expanding counterculture. Their thick yet mist-soft harmonies emerged just as America was searching for a sound gentle enough to soothe the wounds of the era, yet bold enough to voice its buried desires. Their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, 1966, arrived like a blazing signal. Their music carried the breath of folk, but reflected the hazy sheen of California. A California not only of sunlight, but of longing to escape old lives. And within those harmonies, Michelle's soprano rose like a clean, straight beam of light. Time called her the purest soprano in pop music. Not a compliment about technique, but about the feeling her voice imparted. Clear as still water, yet always tinged with something unfinished beneath. With Monday Monday, the group won the 1967 Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. And decades later, the Mamas and the Papas were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1998. These milestones were not simply medals hanging from a brilliant era. They were proof that the sound they created had crossed the boundaries of its time, becoming part of a shared cultural memory where harmony and California spirit found their most enduring voice. Michelle co-wrote California Dreamin', a song that, only months after release, became one of the defining anthems of 20th century music. Credited to John and Michelle Phillips, written in 1963, it was a credit Michelle often called the gift that awakened destiny. Not because of the royalties that followed her for decades, but because it reminded people of a truth often overlooked. Michelle was there at the very moment a legend was born. In the high notes she delivered in the chorus, listeners could hear the winds of her childhood migrations and the echo of a loneliness that had once touched bottom. Success came so quickly, the group hardly had time to steady themselves. The press adored them. Fans shouted their names on the street. Studios wanted them on every project. But the brighter the spotlight, the heavier the chaos behind it. Every rehearsal room seemed filled with something ready to crack. 4 strong personalities, 4 rhythms of life pressed into a structure fragile as glass. Passion for music was only one part of it. The passion between people was the wildest force. Michelle, very young, craving affection yet easily wounded, fell into a romantic relationship with Denny Doherty, the warm-voiced partner beside her in every recording. It was not a grand love, but the closeness that naturally forms between 2 people who share both melodies and private emptiness. Things might have settled until Michelle had a brief involvement with Gene Clark of the Byrds. For John, both her husband and the group's artistic leader, it was the final strain. On June 4, 1966, her 22nd birthday, Michelle was fired from the group after John discovered her relationship with another musician. Jill Gibson was invited to replace her, but within weeks, Michelle's absence unbalanced the harmonies. On August 23rd, she was asked to return. The story revealed what everyone in the group knew, but rarely said aloud. Michelle was an irreplaceable element of the Mamas and the Papas sonic architecture. From late 1966 through 1967, music and conflict overlapped endlessly. The Mamas and the Papas 1966 and Deliver 1967 were born in air thick with both excitement and strain. In the studio, they created mesmerizing sounds. Stepping outside, they collided with emotions they no longer knew where to place. Michelle stood at the center of it all, the voice shaping the group's soft, mystic aura, yet also the focal point of emotional currents she could not control. And in that chaos came the pinnacle of her career and of her youth. Monterey Pop Festival, the summer of 1967. Backstage, Michelle stood behind the curtain, listening to the audience rise like a tide. The air was so dense each breath tasted of dust and burnt grass. The biggest artists of the era passed her by. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane. The light beyond the stage was so white it stung her eyes, and the roar sounded like a dream too large for 4 people who once only wanted a place to sing. When she stepped onto the stage, Michelle felt she was touching a summit while standing on a cliff's edge. Applause surged like crashing waves, and for a few seconds, she grasped the full meaning of fame, breathtaking in its beauty, wounding in its fragility. The high notes she released that night were a mixture of freedom, anxiety, youth, and the faint intuition that this light would not last forever. Monterey was not just a performance. It was the moment Michelle saw the entire path she stood upon. Ahead, dazzling fame. Behind, fractures no one wished to admit. After Monterey, everything accelerated. The group's final 1967 show at the Hollywood Bowl revealed exhaustion plainly. Cass was burned out, Denny lost direction, John became increasingly controlling, and Michelle, radiant on stage, was fading in her private life. When Michelle and John officially divorced in 1969, it was no longer a surprise, but the final step of a journey that had lost its glow long before. People Like Us, 1971, was made only to fulfill a contract, an album that closed an old chapter rather than open a new one. And when the group dissolved that same year, Michelle left both the marriage and the band that had made her name, carrying with her a sense of lightness from being freed and a hollow ache from losing a part of herself. Her voice, the very instrument that had opened destiny's door when she was young, was the only thing that remained. It stood there, quiet but steadfast, reminding her that every ending carries the seed of another beginning. Carrying a heart still marked by fractures into the 1970s, Michelle appeared like someone who had lost her shelter, yet suddenly found herself facing a wider space than she ever imagined. When the mamas and the papas no longer existed, many believed her journey would end as well, that the voice of a 1960s singer would soon fade, dissolving into the soft haze of the era's memory. Michelle did not let that happen. She neither clung to old light nor avoided the shadows ahead. She chose to look directly at them, because sometimes it is in the dark that a person rediscovers the ability to rebuild a life. The film set of the last movie was the beginning. The air was thick with the smell of hot lights, the rush of footsteps from the crew, voices calling between camera adjustments. All of it overwhelming Michelle in an oddly pleasant way, as if life had opened to a new page. There, no one spoke of scandals, and no one tied her to her former band. The people who cared only about the perfect shot looked at Michelle with eyes untouched by her past. And every time the camera moved across her, she felt a strange freedom. That she could become any character simply by breathing in their rhythm. In that moment, Michelle understood that acting could be a quiet form of resurrection. No singing, no microphone, yet for the first time she clearly heard the voice inside her saying her life had not closed at all. It was merely shifting tone. 2 years later, the role of Billy Frechette in Dillinger, 1973, arrived like an indelible mark. Billy, the lover of the legendary outlaw, required both delicacy and endurance, an expression both soft and sharp, something Michelle had carried on her face since her restless childhood years. Standing before the camera in 1930s wardrobe, she was no longer the Michelle of California Dreamin', but a woman learning to hold on to herself amid the chaos of men and violence. Variety wrote that Michelle makes a strong impression, while the New York Times called her performance quietly effective, yet keen. These were not compliments given to a singer dabbling in film, but to a genuine actress. Then the Golden Globe nomination came, confirmation that Michelle had not merely stepped into cinema, she belonged to it. Her subsequent roles took her through many shades. The California Kid carried the smell of gasoline and long roads where emotion could break open as quickly as headlights. Valentino opened a window into old Hollywood fashion, allowing her to play Natasha Rambova with a blend of authority and allure. Bloodline pulled her into the cold suspicion of wealthy families. Between these films, in the mid-1970s, Michelle recorded a solo album, Victim of Romance, as if capturing the lingering echoes of a spirit shaped by change. The voice still present, but now warmer, deeper, marked by the traces of moves, losses, and the many times she reminded herself to rise again. Acting for her was never a rigid technique. It was a constant test, a way to see whether the person behind the name was resilient enough to inhabit many different forms. She chose roles with delicate borders, characters unstable enough to make the audience guess, yet steady enough for an actress to place her own scars within them. That was how Michelle relearned to exist on screen, not by relying on the past, but by letting the past become the foundation for new expressions. From film to television, her path continued expanding. When Knots Landing invited her to play Ann Matheson Sumner in the late 1980s, it was not a step backward but a step forward with depth. Ann was a layered figure, calculating, proud, and unexpectedly vulnerable. Michelle did not shine through loud lines. She used her eyes, silences, and the faint curl of her mouth as tools of storytelling. When she became an official cast member in 1989, She was given a space where a character could unfold gradually over multiple seasons, a rare opportunity for an actor to explore psychological depth over time. Throughout her years on Knots Landing until the series ended, audiences slowly saw a different Michelle. Not merely the high soprano of a 60s band, but a television presence capable of making viewers love her, resent her, empathize with her, or be unsettled by her. In that space, she won a new kind of audience, not one listening through radios, but one sitting before their screens, waiting each week to watch a character live. Amid this pace of work, Victim of Romance existed like a gentle breath. It did not recreate California Dreamin', nor did it attempt to revive her golden era. The album carried the tone of a soul that had passed through many transformations. Her voice was still clear, but beneath that clarity was the timbre of someone who had once looked in the mirror and failed to recognize herself. The songs felt like quiet confessions, Michelle asking for no applause, only leaving warmth for the parts of her life that had never been spoken aloud. Later in her career, roles came to her more softly, not because opportunities diminished, but because Michelle chose her own rhythm, choosing the right stories rather than the loudest attention. As the noise of film sets faded, she worked with a calmness impossible for her younger self, as if the characters and the person within her had finally found a shared tempo. After Knots Landing ended in 1993, Michelle's rhythm of life shifted in ways only those who had spent years under bright lights could truly recognize. The busyness did not disappear. It simply became more distilled, like someone choosing to keep only the items with the deepest personal value after a lifetime of accumulation. In the years that followed, she appeared in Second Chances, Seventh Heaven, That's Life, and various independent films of the late 1990s and early 2000s. None of the works caused major waves, but each role carried the mark of maturity, a stillness, an emotional understanding Michelle could not have reached without the many upheavals that shaped her life. On set, she was no longer the young woman eager to prove herself. Michelle worked with the ease of someone who knew exactly what she could give a character. Sometimes younger crew members watched her with curious respect, not because of her old fame, but because her steady presence softened the atmosphere of filming. Michelle rarely offered instruction, yet her quietness alone was enough to remind everyone that art often shines brightest when it does not need to announce itself. By the early 21st century, she continued appearing in independent projects, such as Jane White is Sick and Twisted and Kids in America, each role like a gentle tap on the door of the past, reminding the world she was still there, still telling stories in her own way. Then time began to slow. Reunions, tributes, and occasions to revisit the memories of Laurel Canyon became bridges that allowed Michelle to stand in the present without being held hostage by nostalgia. When she appeared in Echo in the Canyon, 2019, her narration was light yet sharp, like someone who had learned that memories are not meant to be clung to, but used to illuminate what we still hold. Outside of her art, Michelle's life after 1993 resembled late afternoon light, soft, warm, no longer harsh. She chose people who brought her peace, chose work that stirred something genuine in her. Some years she disappeared so completely that people assumed she had left the industry. But in truth, Michelle had simply carved out a private space for herself, the kind of luxury youth never affords. Looking back, her post-1993 journey was not as dazzling as the decades before, but it carried the persistence of someone who had finally made peace between the artist and the private self. She no longer chased applause. She worked to feel right within herself. That steadiness did not lie in the number of roles she took, but in the quiet harmony between her passion and her life. It was precisely this calm, After so many turbulent years, that became the firm ground on which Michelle stepped into the part of her life untouched by bright lights. The place where personal bindings had left their marks on her since very early on. Among the keepsakes she preserved over the years remained fragments of memory never fully told. Names, unfinished letters, blurred traces of romance like fading ink. Details seemingly small but woven into the secret story of Michelle behind all the glamour. Among them, one name echoed most clearly: John Phillips. The man who entered her life when she still stood at the threshold between youth and untempered innocence. A meeting powerful enough to shift the direction of her path, deep enough to make Michelle believe that love could be both a home and a doorway into destiny. Their 1962 marriage was not merely the result of ripened emotion. It was an invitation into a new world, the world of music, of sprawling, overwhelming dreams, and of a man whose magnetism carried both brilliance and uncharted darkness. The house they lived in, where the earliest recordings of the mamas and the papas were born, held both warmth and the first cracks of their life together. When they wrote music, they flowed into one another like two streams meeting at the right bend of a river. When the house fell quiet, differences crept into the breath between them. John carried storms and insecurities Michelle could not reach, and Michelle held on to her childhood solitude, a terrain even the person she loved most could not fully enter. Their love did not break in a single moment. It thinned gradually, like glass stretched too long. They still stood together on stage, still held hands in photographs, but an invisible distance had already formed. Creative disagreements, jealousy, and whispered stories settled like ash upon a flame that had once burned fiercely. Amid that chaos came their single point of light in 1968, Chinna Phillips. Born on February 12, 1968, Chinna became the clear note that tied Michelle to a new certainty, a small anchor amid the storm. Holding her daughter, Michelle immediately understood what in her life remained unquestionable. The exhausting performances, the arguments without resolution, all fell away when she watched Chinna sleep, her tiny hand gripping her mother's shirt like a thread connecting Michelle to a rare, safe world. Motherhood was not a role. It was the truest part of her. But a child cannot mend fissures that have been stretching for years. As fame climbed and addiction pulled John downward, their marriage slid toward its end. In 1969, they divorced. It was not a loud collapse, just a softly closed door. And yet it left in Michelle a difficult-to-name emptiness. Not regret, but the feeling of losing a piece of memory she once believed immutable. After the divorce, Michelle plunged into work so the shards of her personal life would not hold her back. Yet life sometimes brings decisions so quickly we hardly have time to define them. In 1970, she married Dennis Hopper, a man whose energy was like fire. The marriage lasted 8 days, long enough to leave behind the ashes of a small storm. Michelle rarely speaks of it, not out of shame, but because she understood that some experiences arrive only to teach us that not every force of attraction leads to safety. In the years that followed, Michelle loved and left, held on and let go in the way of someone who had come to understand that love does not always need a final form. Some relationships were never named. Some people simply passed through her life, leaving feelings too indistinct to define, like unfinished letters tucked away in a drawer, not sent, not reread, yet never quite thrown away. The one thing she was certain of: Chinna. When her daughter stepped into music with Wilson Phillips, Michelle was both the mother standing quietly behind and the witness to an invisible line connecting two generations of women in one family, one who had sung for the 1960s, one preparing to raise her voice in the 1990s. In the moments she stood in the wings watching her daughter perform, Michelle recognized something she had never known in romantic love, a feeling of absolute safety, free from the fear of loss. Then in the late 1990s, life brought another presence into Michelle's frame. Stephen Zacks, a man who did not arrive like a storm, but like a small light bright enough to illuminate a room long left untouched. That relationship, stretching from 1999 until his death in 2017, was neither loud nor dramatic. It existed like a quiet interval Michelle had never had. Stephen gave her a simple kind of safety: calm dinners, short trips, conversations without masks. When he died, Michelle lost not only a longtime partner but also a source of steadiness she rarely acknowledged in words. After that loss, Michelle returned to her family by instinct, Chinna and other loved ones as anchors keeping her from drifting away from herself. Love for her at that age no longer took the shape of blazing passion, but of a warm light, gentle enough to carry her through muted afternoons. Family, with all its shortcomings and cracks, became what she held with a profound tenderness. And from that place, seemingly the most private of all, her story opened into another layer of meaning, the trace of someone who chose to live honestly, even when life itself was far from gentle. There are people whose influence is not measured by how often they stand in the spotlight, but by the way they move quietly through their era. Michelle Phillips is one of those whose mark remains in that way, without spectacle, without building a monument to herself, yet still anchored in cultural memory like a soft, persistent streak of light. That imprint began with her voice, but was never confined to it. With the mamas and the papas, Michelle's soprano became part of the emotional architecture of the group. California Dreamin', the song she co-wrote, is not only a sound of the 1960s, but a collective state of mind. A yearning to escape suffocation and find refuge for a generation learning what freedom might mean. Each time Michelle's voice rose in those harmonies, you could hear the tremor of a world just beginning to remake itself. But it was not only music that etched her name. Michelle's image in the Laurel Canyon years, blonde hair, California beauty tinged with mystery, became part of the era's visual language. She never declared herself a spokesperson for the counterculture. Her presence was simply so natural that people had no choice but to remember. In film, Michelle proved that an artist can change mediums without shedding her essence. Dillinger, Valentino, Bloodline, none of them turned her into a box office star, but they carved out a refinement many actors spend a lifetime chasing. From voice to gaze, from the stage to the set, Michelle showed that art is, at its core, the ability to adapt without dissolving. And then television brought her into the homes of millions of American families. Ann Matheson Sumner in Knots Landing was not just a successful role. She was proof of the depth Michelle had gathered from a life filled with fractures. That character made audiences love her, hate her, sympathize with her from episode to episode, leaving a familiarity that only actors who live long enough inside a role can create. Perhaps Michelle's most enduring legacy lies in how she moved through life, neither letting the spotlight consume her nor letting heartbreak erase her. In an era when female artists were easily boxed in as muses or victims, Michelle insisted on standing in the middle ground, where a woman has the right to begin again, many times over, without needing to justify it. Scandals, separations, unstable phases, none of these became full stops. They turned into underlayers for another life, quieter, deeper, truer to who she was. Today, Michelle's presence is still felt in subtle rhythms. Through Chinna and Wilson Phillips's music, through Echo in the Canyon, where Laurel Canyon is revisited with a new breath. Through each moment, when a young listener stumbles upon California Dreamin', pauses, and wonders who that light, sea breeze soft harmony belongs to. Michelle has never tried to stand at the center of every story, but it is precisely this refusal that makes her outline more enduring than many louder icons. A voice, a gaze, a life that did not shy away from its cracks. All of it becomes a gentle resonance that lingers after other sounds have faded. And within that long echo, Michelle leaves something deeper behind. The sense that sometimes it is the softest things that carve the most lasting marks. Looking back at her journey, one does not see only a voice that walked beside its era, but also the subtle shifts she left behind, almost too slight to notice. The way a woman entered music without forfeiting her softness. The way she reclaimed creative authorship without fanfare. The way she turned beauty into something more than appearance. These things did not ignite any blazing revolution, but they quietly reshaped how the public perceived the female voice, creative agency, and artistic beauty. As if Michelle's legacy were not carved into stone, but dissolved into every arrangement, every recording, every young listener who chances upon her voice somewhere and stops, for just a moment, but long enough to feel something gentle yet enduring. It is perhaps because she has lived through all those sustained echoes that Michelle has reached her later years with such rare calm. At an age when many have withdrawn from the world, she has found another tempo. Slow, clear, and spacious enough for memories to come and go without cutting anymore. She lives in Los Angeles, along streets that have followed her since she was very young, where sunlight still falls across eaves in exactly the way she remembers. The frenzy of her burning years no longer clings to her. In its place are quiet mornings, days drifting lightly like breath, demanding nothing more from her. Michelle does not appear frequently in public, but whenever she chooses to, an intimate conversation, a retrospective program, a scene in Echo in the Canyon, people see another Michelle. No longer the golden girl of California Dreamin', nor the television face of the 1980s, but a woman who has lived enough to understand that the true worth of her life lies in her ability to stand firm in storms and soften when the storms pass. She spends more time with her family, especially Chinna, the child who once fit perfectly in her arms in the days when Michelle herself felt most fragile. Now, when mother and daughter stand side by side, you can see an invisible line running from Laurel Canyon in the 1960s, through the pop stages of the early 1990s, to the quiet house where they share tea in the afternoons. At the crossroads of those three timelines, Michelle appears not only as a voice that has weathered so many tides, but as the silhouette of an era learning to listen to women with a new gentleness. Her calm, muted beauty, a light that has no desire to take up space, has become part of the Laurel Canyon aesthetic. Delicate, but unbroken. Soft, but not dissolving. Later, female artists have said they recognized in Michelle an unspoken message, that private life is not a burden, but material to sing from, that cracks can be the very places where music shines. Through her steady existence, Michelle opened up a place for those who came after her to tell their stories without asking permission. And in the mirror of motherhood, love at this age is no longer protection from above, but a dialogue between two women who recognize each other's light in the deepest parts of their lives. Michelle still keeps a journal, still stores unsent letters, faded Polaroids, tiny scraps of paper no one else can read anymore. She once joked that memories need a roof, too. Inside the joke lies a layer of truth. She believes life can only be understood when we look at it with eyes that have changed color over the years. Part of those memories Michelle has already set down in her own voice in her memoir, California Dreamin', the true story of the mamas and the papas, published 1986, a book where she opens the little-known backstage doors and reclaims her creative path, from the first harmony rehearsals to the real cost of fame. It may be because she wrote those memories out and renamed them that Michelle has found peace in the days that remain. She likes to garden, not to display anything but to feel the damp earth under her hands. Neighbors sometimes see her watering plants in her pajamas, silver hair tied back, face so serene, it's hard to believe she once stood before seas of fans. Yet it is precisely this simplicity that she had always wanted to reach, long before life finally made room for it. Sometimes Michelle plays old recordings, not to cling to what has passed, but to listen to herself, what that young girl was touching, longing for, trembling over. There are moments when she smiles, others when she pauses, but she has never once stopped a track halfway, as if turning her back on memory would also mean turning her back on the part of herself that brought her to where she is. Those who have worked with her say that Michelle now resembles late-day light more than stage light. Not dazzling, not demanding attention, but leaving a warmth that makes anyone passing by want to linger a little longer. She speaks less, but each word carries the weight of a life that has loved much, stumbled often, risen many times. Enough to know what is worth keeping. Michelle's life today is not a straight line to glory, nor a map of falls. It resembles a great spiral in which each phase leaves behind its own shard of light, sharp at times, dim at others, precarious here, steady there, but all of them ultimately returning to a single center, the person she is, with a voice that once opened a door of destiny and an inner life that has traveled through enough darkness to reach the calm she never dared dream of in her youth. Michelle, the woman who once thought she didn't have enough voice to sing lead, became the piece that completed a sound which shook an entire generation. And you? Have you ever watched something small within you unexpectedly become the compass for your whole life? Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories about people who may seem ordinary, yet carry moments powerful enough to change the way we look at an entire era.